Welcome to True Crime Threads, where the darkest secrets unravel, one story at a time. In this episode, we uncover the chilling mystery behind the triple murder of Aldea del Fresno. Aldea del Fresno, a peaceful town west of Madrid, was known for its stone houses, olive trees, and quiet routines. With a population just under 3,000, crime was almost unheard of. People left doors unlocked, neighbors shared bread, and everyone knew each other by name. It was the kind of place where the loudest sound at night was the wind brushing against the shutters or a distant dog barking at shadows. Life followed a simple rhythms of mornings, quiet afternoons, and nights filled with stillness. The people of Aldea del Fresno cherished their calm life. There were no major scandals, no unsolved crimes, and barely a need for the local police to do more than settle the occasional noise complaint. That is what made the events of October 14, 2019 so disturbing. At 3:17 a.m., a call was placed to emergency services. A house on Kilolmo, near the edge of town, was on fire. The voice on the line belonged to a man walking home after visiting a friend. He noticed flames coming from a small two-story house with its front door wide open. Within minutes, sirens pierced the silence. Firefighters and police arrived quickly, battling the flames that had already consumed most of the ground floor. Neighbors gathered in robes and slippers, watching from a distance, horrified and confused. The fire was strong, but it was eventually brought under control before it spread to nearby houses. When the smoke cleared, first responders entered the building. What they discovered inside would haunt the village forever. 3 bodies were found, one in the living room, slumped behind a scorched armchair, one near the kitchen doorway, the third on the stairs. As if trying to escape, they were burned beyond recognition, their features lost to smoke and flame. The heat had melted the paint from the walls, cracked the ceiling, and turned furniture to ash. Investigators initially suspected the victims had died in the fire, maybe a gas leak, a tragic accident. But even before sunrise, whispers were beginning to spread. People said they heard no explosion. Others claimed the dog next door had barked for nearly an hour before the fire started. Something didn't feel right. Later that morning, authorities confirmed the names of the victims: Antonio Martin, a retired journalist, his wife Rosa, who worked at the village bakery, and their daughter Clara, who had recently returned home after leaving her job in Madrid. The town mourned their loss, lighting candles outside the remains of the house. The entire community felt shaken. No one could imagine a reason why anyone would want to harm the Martin family. They were well-liked, private, and peaceful. But by the afternoon, that peace was shattered once again. Preliminary autopsy reports revealed a chilling detail. None of the 3 had died in the fire. Each had been murdered: Antonio from a blow to the head, Rosa from multiple stab wounds, and Clara had been strangled. The fire had been set after their deaths, likely to destroy evidence. What began as a suspected accident was now a full-blown murder investigation. For the first time in its quiet history, Aldea del Fresno was facing a violent crime. The village, known for silence and safety, had become the scene of a triple murder. The house on Kilolmo, now a charred skeleton of its former self, had once been a warm and quiet home. It belonged to the Martin family: Antonio, a retired journalist; Rosa, a bakery worker known for her kindness; and Clara, their 25-year-old daughter, who had recently returned to live with them. Just 2 weeks before the tragedy, Clara had left her job and life in Madrid without much explanation. Her sudden return was noticed by neighbors, but no one asked questions. In small towns, people often keep their curiosity to themselves. When authorities entered the remains of the house, they quickly realized that the damage caused by the fire did not tell the full story. Fire investigators identified clear signs of accelerants near the kitchen and stairwell, meaning the blaze had been set deliberately. There was no sign of a gas leak, no faulty wiring, and no evidence pointing to an accidental cause. Forensic teams found traces of gasoline in the hallway. The fire had been planned carefully and ignited in several places at once, likely to ensure rapid destruction. But even before the flames started, the real crime had already taken place. Autopsies provided disturbing details. Antonio had died from a fractured skull, likely struck with a blunt object. Rosa had multiple stab wounds, deep and violent, suggesting rage or panic. Clara had bruises on her neck and signs of a struggle, indicating she had been strangled. All three were killed before the fire, meaning the killer or killer shot stayed long enough to ensure they were dead before setting the blaze. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate and organized. The most puzzling part was the lack of first entry. The doors were locked, the windows intact, and there was no damage to the locks. That suggested one of two things. Either the family had let the person in willingly, or they had been attacked by someone with a key. There were no signs of ransacking. Valuables, including Rosa's jewelry and Antonio's vintage watch, were untouched. Even Clara's handbag, with her phone and wallet, was found in the hallway. Robbery was clearly not the motive. Nothing was missing except answers. Police immediately began gathering court footage from nearby roads, shops, and the gas station a few blocks away, but Aldea del Fresno wasn't covered by a dense camera network like larger cities. Only the gas station had any recordings from that night. Unfortunately, those few seconds of footage revealed nothing unusual. No unknown vehicles, no strange faces, no sign of someone entering or leaving the house. Neighbors were interviewed, but no one had seen anything out of the ordinary. One man claimed he heard a dog barking for nearly an hour, starting around midnight. Another woman said she smelled smoke just before 3 a.m., but thought it was someone burning leaves. Not a single person reported seeing anyone entering the Martin residence that night. The killer had slipped in and out without a trace, leaving behind 3 bodies in a burning home. In a town where everyone knew everything, the complete silence surrounding the triple murder made it even more chilling. The absence of clues didn't just slow the investigation, it terrified the villagers. Whoever did this had planned it down to the last detail, and they had vanished like smoke in the night. Investigators turned their attention to the recent history of the Martin family, hoping to uncover anything that might explain why someone would want them dead. Antonio had lived a quiet life in recent years, but decades earlier, he had worked as an investigative journalist in Madrid. He had written for a respected national newspaper during a turbulent time in Spanish politics. His work had focused on exposing corruption, organized crime, and political scandals. Though he had retired from public life many years ago, he had recently begun writing again for a newspaper, but for himself. Inside a locked drawer in Antonio's study, police discovered a handwritten manuscript. It appeared to be a memoir, or personal account of his time as a journalist. The pages were filled with notes, memories, and names. Some of those names were crossed out, others circled. There were vague references to powerful figures, bribes, and threats he had received during his career. It was clear Antonio had not forgotten what he had once uncovered. In fact, he seemed to be re-examining it. Investigators wondered if someone had found out about this unfinished work and decided to stop it before it was ever published. At the same time, they started looking into Clara's recent activities. Her decision to move back home had raised questions. She had left her job in Madrid without notice, and when her employer was contacted, they said she had simply stopped showing up. Friends from the city said she had become distant in recent weeks. More importantly, Clara's bank account showed large transfers within the past month. One came from a company registered in the Cayman Islands, a company with no website, no employees listed, and no clear business purpose. The second came from an individual connected to Antonio's past, a man he had once investigated but never written about publicly. These financial connections were strange, unexplained, and troubling. Investigators also interviewed Rosa's co-workers at the local bakery. One woman recalled a conversation from just 3 days before the fire. Rosa had mentioned that she felt uneasy, as if someone had been watching the house. She said she had seen a figure standing near the woods behind their property late at night. She didn't say anything more about it, and the subject was quickly dropped. Now, that memory took on a new weight. Someone had been watching them, waiting, perhaps preparing to act. The picture that was forming was one of a family that had unknowingly stepped into danger. Antonio had been revisiting a dangerous part of his past. Clara had been involved in something unclear, possibly connected to powerful people. Rosa had noticed signs but perhaps didn't understand their meaning. What had once seemed like a peaceful home now appeared to be the center of a very deliberate series of events. There were no signs of an emotional outburst or a spontaneous act of violence. This was cold, precise, and deeply personal. The family hadn't just been killed, they had been silenced. Each clue brought the investigators closer to the truth, but also deeper into a world that seemed darker and more dangerous than anyone in Aldea del Fresno had ever imagined. The answers weren't just hidden, they were protected. A major breakthrough came during a careful second inspection of the ruins of the Martin home. Amid the debris, forensic experts found the burnt remains of a mobile phone top beneath a collapsed wooden beam near the living room. Though most of it was destroyed, the memory chip had survived. Data recovery specialists worked for days to extract any usable files. What they found changed the direction of the investigation entirely. Among the recovered files was a single short video clip. The footage was dark and grainy, but clear enough to make out some details. It had been recorded just hours before the fire. The camera appeared to be placed somewhere low, perhaps accidentally turned on during a moment of panic. In the video, a man wearing a dark costume moved through the hallway with gloves on his hands. He walked with confidence, pausing briefly to check each corner, avoiding the line of sight of visible cameras. He clearly knew the layout of the house and where to find the security devices. Before the clip ended, he reached up and disabled the camera system entirely. The investigators had no idea who he was. His face was never fully visible, but on his right wrist was a distinctive tattoo, 3 small dots forming a triangle. That symbol became the next focus. It wasn't a logo mark or anything common in Spanish criminal databases, but it was eventually matched through Interpol records. It belonged to a man believed to be a contract killer, formerly associated with paramilitary groups in Eastern Europe. He was connected to a string of unsolved murders across different countries, always with the same signature: no first entry, no evidence left behind, and precise, organized execution. The assassin had entered Spain under a false identity just 2 weeks before the Martin murders. Immigration records showed a forged passport and an alias that had already disappeared from the system. He had left no digital trail, no hotel bookings, and no credit card activity. Investigators believed he had been paid in cash, brought in quietly, and guided directly to his target. He had likely left the country within hours of setting the fire. The real shock came when they connected this killer to a name found in Antonio's unfinished manuscript: Vicente Alvarez, a powerful businessman with deep political connections. Alvarez had once served as a high-ranking government official. During the late 1980s, Antonio had begun investigating Alvarez for involvement in illegal arms deals. The story was never published. Soon after, Antonio resigned and moved his family away from Madrid, settling in Aldea del Fresno. Now, decades later, Alvarez had resurfaced in Antonio's writings, mentioned not just once, but several times. It was clear that Antonio had been preparing to finally publish the truth. Investigators suspected that he had shared parts of the draft with Clara, who may have attempted to expose the truth through her own connections. Her recent bank transfers suggested that she may have been offered money to stay silent or perhaps threatened to release the information if she wasn't. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about robbery. This was about erasing a threat before it could grow. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to ensure that whatever Antonio and Clara knew would die with them. The fire hadn't been set in. Penicillin had been part of the plan from the beginning. The investigation shifted its full weight toward Clara's financial activities, and what emerged was both disturbing and unexpected. The 2 large transactions discovered in her bank account were traced further. The first, coming from an offshore company based in the Cayman Islands, was found to be part of a network of shell corporations linked to several clients of Vicente Alvarez's old business empire. The second transaction, smaller but still significant, came from a Madrid-based law firm previously used by Alvarez's political contacts during the time of Antonio's original investigation into government corruption. These payments were not for any services rendered by Clara. They had no legal explanation. Investigators suspected they were hush money, or worse, a bait in a trap she didn't realize she had walked into. Clara's digital trail showed that she had tried to reach out to several people in the weeks before her death. She had emailed an old university professor, reached out to a freelance journalist, and attempted to contact an online whistleblower platform. None of her messages contained direct accusations or attachments, but their tone was clear she was afraid and trying to find a way to release something without being exposed. She had also attempted to print a portion of Antonio's manuscript at a local copy shop in Madrid, but the records showed she never picked up the documents. Something had scared her into stopping. Further examination of her phone history revealed that Clara had been in a brief relationship with Leo Alvarez, the only son of Vicente Alvarez. They had met at a corporate event a year earlier while Clara was working as a marketing assistant. What began as a casual romance had quickly soured. Clara had broken off contact weeks before returning to Aldea del Fresno. The timing raised alarms. She had moved out of Madrid, quit her job, and returned to her family home around the same time she had ended her relationship with Leo. Friends later admitted that she had mentioned something dangerous about the Alvarez family, but no one had taken her seriously at the time. The final pieces began falling into place. Investigators concluded that Clara had likely discovered the full extent of her father's old files and decided to act on them. Vicente Alvarez, whose legacy had always been protected by wealth and influence, now faced a new kind of threat, not from Antonio directly, but from his daughter. She had youth, access, and digital platforms Antonio never used. Her decision to act may have triggered a swift and brutal response. Antonio had simply become part of the target once his involvement became known. Rosa, caught in the middle, had no chance of surviving what had been set in motion. Vicente Alvarez was named as a person of interest, but formal charges were never filed. He denied all involvement and distanced himself from any connection to the killer or the offshore accounts. The hitman disappeared, believed to have used false documents to flee through Gibraltar and later into South America. No arrest was made. The house on Cayo Olmo was demolished months later. Locals placed flowers on the empty ground every October in quiet remembrance. The case remains officially open, but no further progress has been made. The silence left behind is louder than any confession. 3 lives were taken, not by chance, but by design. A family destroyed to bury a truth the world still hasn't seen.